Quietly in the darkness of the Tower of London, a mysterious story awaits discovery. The story of two young princes, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, children whom history has once again forgotten. Contrary to the bright images of young kings, their deaths are shrouded in a veil of silence and mystery. No one knows where they went, and their bodies were never found. Guessing and speculating, but none of us can be certain about their end. Why was it a power game or an unspeakable crime conspiracy? In the game of royal power, royal blood does not guarantee survival. That's why when the princes disappear, no one asks the right questions. A child not only loses the chance to live, but becomes part of dark conspiracies. But to understand the disappearance of Edward V, we must rewind time and explore the story behind it. Who stood behind this someone who could end the future of a royal dynasty in one dark night? Edward V, only 12 years old when his father Edward IV died, had not yet ascended the throne before facing an unimaginable betrayal. He was sent to the Tower of London in early April 1483. The prince and his brother Richard of Shrewsbury both hoped to soon be crowned. But once they entered the tower, everything changed. This change didn't come from external forces, but from those they trusted most. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, Edward's uncle, began his power game. After bringing the princes into the tower, Richard quickly established his authority and gradually secured his position as the one with the right to ascend the throne. Imagine the moment when Edward V realized that not everything was going according to plan. They were no longer carefree princes, but had been caught in a power spiral from which they couldn't escape. Richard, who had appeared to be a protector, was in fact the one who wanted to replace them. But was the disappearance of the two princes merely an accident of history, or a conspiracy cloaked in secrecy? In June 1483, Edward V and his brother Richard were imprisoned in the tower and suddenly disappeared during the summer. Their disappearance made many suspicious, especially when some witnesses claimed that they were murdered, but no one could prove it. There were only rumors, gossip, and silence surrounding the event. Yet it was this silence that made the crime clearer than ever. The public did not question, and the royal court closed ranks. The princes were gone, but the truth remained elusive. Richard ascended to the throne, but could he truly rule in peace, knowing the deaths of the princes haunted him? A kingdom built on lies and betrayal could never truly be stable. His reign would forever be marked by this dark chapter. Could it be that Richard's rise to power, though seemingly legitimate, was stained by the blood of those he betrayed? His claims to the throne were steeped in treachery, and the silence of the prince's death hung heavily over his rule. As time passed, whispers began to grow louder. There were always those who questioned the legitimacy of Richard's ascension. Had he truly inherited the throne, or had he simply removed those who stood in his way? The mystery of the prince's deaths would linger for centuries as historians and the public alike speculated on what had truly happened within the tower. But the truth remained locked away, buried beneath layers of power struggles and silence. The true tragedy of the prince's disappearance lies not only in their untimely deaths, but in the legacy left behind. A kingdom built on such bloodshed would never find true peace. Richard's victory was a hollow one won at too great a cost. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were not merely two lost children. They were symbols of a lost future, the hope for a peaceful reign that was cruelly snatched away. Their deaths marked the end of an era and the beginning of a dark age. What was left in the wake of their disappearance was a kingdom built on distrust and fear. Richard's reign, marked by bloodshed and treachery, would forever be remembered not for its victories, but for the lives it destroyed in its pursuit of power. As the years passed, Edward V and his brother Richard faded from the public consciousness. Their deaths became just another forgotten tragedy, a footnote in the larger story of England's royal power struggles. But for some, their names would never be erased. The silence that surrounded the princes' deaths only added to their mystery. Without answers, rumors swirled, and every corner of the kingdom buzzed with whispered theories. Was Richard the murderer, or was there another hand at play? As time went on, the Tower of London became a symbol of the bloodshed that had occurred within its walls. The prince's disappearance would forever haunt those who sought to control the throne. Their deaths remained a chilling reminder of the price of power. Richard's reign continued, but the shadow of the missing princes loomed over him. He tried to bury the past, but it kept resurfacing. No matter how much he claimed to be the rightful king, there would always be those who doubted his legitimacy. Every decision Richard made seemed to be weighed down by the invisible presence of the princes. Were they still alive somewhere hidden away, Or had they truly been murdered in cold blood, their lives snuffed out to secure Richard's throne? Historians have long debated the motives behind the prince's disappearance. Was Richard's ambition the driving force, or was it the machinations of others? The truth buried deep within the dark recesses of history remains elusive, leaving only speculation. The fate of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury continued to be a subject of fascination for centuries. Their story was not just a tale of lost royal blood, but a reflection of the ruthless nature of politics and the lengths people would go to in the pursuit of power. Though Richard would go on to rule, he could never escape the stain of the prince's deaths. Their disappearance cast a long shadow over his reign, and the whispers of conspiracy would never cease. His rule was never as secure as he hoped it would be. The Tower of London became a grim symbol for the prince's fate. It was said to be their final resting place, though no one could say for sure. The building, once a royal palace, had become a place of secrets, holding the ghosts of those who disappeared within its walls. The question of what truly happened to the princes continued to spark intrigue. Were they killed at Richard's command, or was there another culprit behind their deaths? The mystery only deepened with each passing year, and still no conclusive evidence surfaced. What became of the bodies? Were they buried somewhere within the tower, or were they disposed of in a way too grim to imagine? Their disappearance was not just a tragedy, it was a mystery that would remain unsolved, a dark chapter in English history. Richard's time on the throne, though marked by relative stability, was never free from the burden of the prince's deaths. The whispers of the bloodshed that secured his position lingered in the corners of courtrooms and among the people. His reign, though strong in many respects, could not escape the question of legitimacy. With every victory, he claimed a shadow of doubt hovered over him. Had his rise been earned, or had it come at the cost of innocent lives? Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were not just lost princes, they were potential symbols of hope and change. Their deaths, though never confirmed, marked the collapse of what could have been a different future for England, a future without bloodshed and betrayal. The disappearance of the princes became more than a historical event. It was a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition. The pursuit of power had claimed their lives, and in doing so, it had created a story that would echo through the centuries. The public's perception of Richard continued to be shaped by the mystery of the prince's disappearance. Though he was king, he was never fully accepted. People remembered what had happened even if they couldn't explain it, and for many that was enough. The legacy of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury was one of lost potential. They were two boys who might have ruled England with wisdom and compassion, but their lives were cut short by the machinations of those who saw them as obstacles to their own power. Over time, their names faded from the public consciousness. Other events and figures rose to take their place in the historical narrative. Yet for some, the mystery of their deaths was an enduring enigma, a story that refused to be forgotten. In the years following Richard's death, the mystery of the princes continued to haunt the English monarchy. New kings would rise and fall, but the question of what happened to Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury remained an unanswered riddle. The Tower of London, still standing as a monument to the past, served as a reminder of the tragedy that unfolded within its walls. The prince's disappearance was just one chapter in its long history, but it was a chapter that would never be erased from memory. The mystery of the princes was one that historians, royalists, and commoners alike would revisit again and again. Was Richard the murderer? Or was there another unseen force that took the lives of these young heirs to the throne? As the centuries passed, the story of the missing princes was retold in countless ways. Some believed it was a political plot, while others saw it as a tragic accident, a series of misfortunes that led to the untimely deaths of two young boys. The mystery remained unsolved, but the consequences of the princes' deaths rippled through history. Richard's reign, though successful in the eyes of some, was always tainted by the whispers of what he had done to claim the throne. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were not merely victims. They were symbols of a corrupt system. Their deaths exposed the dark side of power, where betrayal and murder were tools used to shape the future of a kingdom. Richard, despite his many successes, could never fully escape the stain of the prince's deaths. It didn't matter how much he tried to solidify his reign, there would always be those who remembered the boys who disappeared in the night. Their deaths, though never fully understood, were emblematic of the dangers that lurked in the pursuit of power. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were pawns in a game much larger than themselves, and their disappearance would forever be part of England's dark history. The legacy of the prince's disappearance would continue to shape English politics for generations. Their deaths served as a reminder that in the game of power, those who are most vulnerable, those with the most to lose, often pay the highest price. As new monarchs took the throne, the story of the missing princes faded into the background. However, for many, their fate was never forgotten. It lingered in the hearts of the people, a tragic tale of betrayal and lost potential. Over time, the mystery of their deaths became less about the princes themselves and more about what their deaths represented. It was a story of the cost of ambition and of how power could erase the future of an entire generation. Though the details of their deaths remained a mystery, the legacy of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury lived on in the stories told about them. They became figures of tragedy, symbols of innocence lost in the brutal struggle for the throne. And so as history marched on, the princes remained in the shadows, their names spoken only in hushed tones. They were gone, but their story, shrouded in mystery, was one that would never fully fade from the pages of history. The mystery of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury's deaths would forever haunt the English monarchy. Their names became synonymous with tragedy, and their disappearance marked a turning point in the kingdom's history, a moment when innocence and power collided. In the courtrooms and alleys of London, rumors spread. Some said Richard had been justified in his actions. Others whispered that the princes had been innocent victims of a power-hungry king. No matter the story, the question remained: what really happened? Despite the passage of time, the legacy of their disappearance remained a fixture in English folklore. The boys, once royal heirs, were reduced to mere specters haunting the kingdom they could never rule. Their deaths, though mysterious, spoke volumes about the power dynamics of the era. In the end, their fates were not just about two young princes, but about the ruthless forces that shaped the destiny of England itself. Richard may have ascended to the throne, but his legacy was forever tied to the deaths of the two boys. His reign, though marked by military successes, could never escape the stain of the prince's disappearance, which would be remembered for generations. As time went on, England moved forward, but the story of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury became a cautionary tale. The price of power was too often paid with innocent lives, and their deaths proved just how much the royal bloodline was worth in the Game of Thrones. Though their names were often whispered, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were never truly forgotten. They were the faces of a tragic chapter in England's royal history, the haunting reminder of how power could so easily be abused. The prince's disappearance, long shrouded in mystery, became part of the mythos of the Tower of London. The prison, a place where power and death intertwined, would forever be linked with their untold story. Their deaths would be remembered as a tragic loss, a fate that could have been avoided. But in the world of power, survival was never guaranteed, and the princes' fates were sealed by forces beyond their control. In the end, the mystery of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury was not just about the lost princes, but about the corruption and danger of power itself. Their disappearance would forever remain a stark reminder of how far people would go to claim the throne. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury became more than just missing princes. They became symbols of innocence lost. Their deaths spoke to the cruelty of power and the lengths that those who sought it would go to secure their place in history. For many years, the story of the prince's disappearance was told through rumors and speculations. Their names were invoked during discussions of royal power struggles, always with a sense of sorrow for the fate that befell them. Though the truth of their deaths was never fully known, the shadow they cast over English history could not be ignored. The prince's story remained a cautionary tale for future monarchs. Power could corrupt, and innocence could be wiped away in an instant. As new kings ascended to the throne, the memory of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury began to fade. But the mystery of their fate never completely disappeared. It lingered in the air, unresolved, like a question that would never be answered. Richard's reign, though marked by triumphs, was always clouded by the whispers of the missing princes. Every victory he achieved was tempered by the reminder of the brutal act that had ensured his ascension to the throne. The princes' deaths were not just a tragedy for their family, but for the nation. They were young boys who had never been given the chance to fulfill their destinies. Their loss became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the pursuit of power. Though Richard had successfully claimed the throne, his rule was always haunted by the specter of the princes. The political and historical ramifications of their deaths would continue to affect English society long after their names were forgotten. Edward, even Richard of Shrewsbury, were victims of a system that valued power above all else. Their disappearance exposed the brutal reality of royal politics. The innocent were often sacrificed for the sake of ambition. The royal court, once filled with whispers of betrayal and deceit, slowly began to move on. But the deaths of the princes remained a dark chapter in England's history, a chapter that would not be easily erased from collective memory. Though they were gone, the legacy of Edward IV and Richard of Shrewsbury continued to resonate. Their story became a reminder that in the world of royalty, there was no guarantee of survival, even for those who were born to rule. Their disappearance remained an unanswered question. No matter how many years passed, the story of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury was never completely forgotten. It was a haunting riddle that lingered in the minds of those who sought to understand it. The Tower of London, with its cold walls and dark history, continued to stand as a monument to the princes' tragic end. It was said that their spirits still wandered, the halls lost forever in the shadows of the past. As Richard's reign unfolded, the princes' deaths were increasingly viewed as a tragedy of the times. The brutal realities of royal ambition left little room for compassion, and the princes had become mere pawns in a larger game. In the years that followed, the story of the princes continued to evolve. Some saw their deaths as a natural consequence of power struggles, while others believed it was the work of a single man who would stop at nothing to seize the throne. The silence surrounding their deaths continued to speak louder than any explanation could. It was the quiet after the storm, the calm that followed a violent act. In that silence, the prince's loss was felt by all, though few dared to speak of it openly. Richard, despite his ascent to the throne, never fully escaped the stain of the prince's deaths. His reign would always be viewed through the lens of suspicion. Had he truly been the rightful king, or had he simply taken what was never meant to be his? The disappearance of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury became a powerful symbol. Their lives cut short by ambition and betrayal represented the tragic cost of the Game of Thrones. And their deaths, though never confirmed, remained the subject of debate for centuries. Even after Richard's death, the mystery of the princes lingered. It became a part of England's royal lore, a dark tale that would be told and retold for generations. The princes' loss was not just their own, it was a loss felt by the entire kingdom. Their names may have faded from the official records, but for many, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury would never be forgotten. Their story was too powerful, too tragic to be erased by time. It would remain a part of England's blood-soaked history. And so their deaths became more than just a royal tragedy. They were a reminder of the dangers of power, of how easily the innocent could be discarded in the name of ambition. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were victims not just of Richard, but of the system that allowed such horrors to take place. As the years passed, new monarchs took their places and England moved on. But the story of the missing princes remained a constant reminder of how the pursuit of power could destroy everything, including innocence and hope. The mystery of their deaths continued to stir curiosity, even among the common folk. Though many believed it was a conspiracy, no one could ever gather concrete evidence. It was as if the truth was locked away, hidden in the shadows of history. The Tower of London, standing stoic and silent, continued to be a symbol of the darker side of royal life. It was a place of both protection and imprisonment, where the truth of the prince's fate remained elusive. For centuries, the prince's disappearance was discussed in hushed tones, always with a sense of sorrow. Historians, royalists, and commoners alike debated the events, each with their own theories, but none could ever uncover the truth. Even with the passing of time, the question still lingered: did Richard order their deaths? Or was he merely a pawn in a larger, more dangerous game? No one could say for sure, and perhaps no one ever would. The tragic end of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury would forever be a part of England's royal history. Their story was woven into the fabric of the nation's past, a haunting reminder of the cost of ambition. Richard's name would forever be tied to their mysterious disappearance. No matter how much he achieved, the legacy of the prince's deaths would overshadow every victory. The stain of that silence could never truly be washed away. In the years following, the mystery of the princes was romanticized and mythologized. They became tragic figures in the tale of royal succession, two innocent boys whose fate was sealed by forces beyond their control. The question of their death persisted. It was one of history's great unsolved mysteries, a riddle that haunted England's royal court for generations. And no matter how many answers were proposed, none could fully explain what had happened to them. Their deaths became the stuff of legends, and their story was immortalized in books, plays, and films. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury may have disappeared from history, but their legacy would live on forever, etched in the annals of time. Though the story of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury faded from immediate history, it continued to resonate in the hearts of the people. They became symbols of everything that could go wrong when power was abused and innocence was betrayed. The prince's disappearance became a dark fable passed down through generations. Over time, it transformed from a historical event into a legend, a ghost story that would never quite leave the collective memory of England. Their deaths remained a stark reminder of how easily history could be rewritten. A kingdom built on lies, betrayal, and the thirst for power left no room for the innocent. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were among those discarded in the ruthless pursuit of a throne. The mystery surrounding the princes would not easily fade. Every few years, a new theory would emerge, reigniting old debates. Was Richard guilty? Did he give the orders? Or was the real culprit someone else altogether? As the monarchy continued, the story of the lost princes lingered like a scar. It served as a reminder that in the world of kings and queens, the lives of the innocent were often the first casualties in the pursuit of power. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury would never be forgotten, no matter how much time passed. Their names, their disappearance, and their untimely deaths would be part of the tapestry of England's royal history, forever bound to the kingdom's rise and fall. Their legacy was not one of glory, but of tragedy. They were the ghosts of a royal dynasty that might have been their deaths a sorrowful turning point in the history of a kingdom that was willing to sacrifice even its own blood for the sake of power. The disappearance of the princes ultimately served as a cautionary tale for future rulers. In the Game of Thrones, the price of ambition was often paid with the blood of the innocent, and Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were the ultimate price. In the end, the question of what really happened to Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury may never be answered. But their story remains a dark chapter in the pages of England's history, reminding us all of the dangers of unchecked power. And so the story of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury lives on, not as a tale of triumph, but as a haunting reminder of the price of ambition, the fragility of innocence, and the dark side of power. Their disappearance remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries.